Welcome back to another deep dive here on Books and Bites, where we like to say the essence of great books comes in minutes and helps supercharge your learning journey.
I love that tagline.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So today we are diving deep into a really, I think, a really important book, and I'm excited to get into this one. It's A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn.
Yeah, this is a classic.
Yeah.
And I think one that a lot of people have maybe heard of, but maybe haven't actually gotten around to reading.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to kind of break it down.
Yeah. Are you ready to hear kind of a different side of American history?
Absolutely. I think that's what Zinn is all about.
Yeah.
You know, this book really flips the script. Instead of focusing on presidents and generals and, you know, the big names that we always hear about in history.
Right.
Zinn highlights the often overlooked perspectives of, you know, indigenous peoples and enslaved Africans, workers, women, immigrants.
Yeah, the people who maybe don't always make it into the history books, or if they do, they're just kind of a footnote.
Exactly. And what I think is so fascinating is how he connects their struggles across different eras of American history and shows how those struggles shaped the course of events, even when they were facing incredible challenges.
So he's not just saying like, hey, these people existed.
Right.
He's arguing that their struggles are like essential to understanding American history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's really Zinn's core argument, is that, you know, to truly understand history, you need to look at it from the bottom up, not just from the top down.
Yeah.
He wants us to see how power dynamics play out, not just who's in charge at any given moment.
So how does he actually do that? Where does he start?
Well, he starts right at the beginning with Columbus's arrival in the Americas.
Oh, yeah.
But instead of focusing on Columbus's, you know, quote-unquote discoveries, he centers the narrative on the Arawaks, the indigenous people who were already living there.
Right. Chapter 1,
Yep.
Columbus, the Indians, and Human Progress.
Exactly. That's where he starts. And I think that's so brilliant because, you know, we all learned about Columbus in school, but Zinn's take is totally different.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, he contrasts the Arawaks' generosity and their communal way of life with the brutality and the greed of the Spanish colonizers.
Yeah.
And he even quotes Columbus's own journal, where Columbus describes the Arawaks as so naive and so free with their possessions that no one who has not witnessed them would believe it.
Wow.
But this naivete made them vulnerable to exploitation.
Right. It's like that saying, you know, history is written by the victors.
Exactly.
You know, and Zinn is trying to give a voice to the people who were silenced and to show how their experiences actually shaped what America became.
Precisely. And he carries this perspective through the entire book. So, for example, when he gets to the American Revolution, chapter 4, he challenges that traditional narrative that, you know, we all kind of take for granted.
We're taught to think of it as a fight for freedom and democracy.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it was.
Yeah, it was for some. But Zinn points out that many ordinary people didn't actually benefit that much.
So who did benefit besides, you know, obviously the founding fathers and all that?
Well, that's a great question. And, you know, the answer is the wealthy elite, the landowners, the merchants.
Okay.
You know, the people who already held a lot of power.
Okay.
And Zinn argues that the revolution, while obviously a major turning point, also kind of solidified their position at the top of the social and economic hierarchy.
So it's like, sure, we celebrate the ideals of the revolution, but did those ideals actually apply to everybody?
Yeah.
Were there groups who were essentially left out of the, you know, the freedom equation?
That's a great question. And it's one that Zinn keeps asking throughout the book.
Okay.
You know, he forces us to look beyond the simple narratives and grapple with the complexity of history, which can be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it's also, I think, really important.
Well, and he doesn't shy away from controversy either.
Oh, absolutely not.
But like when he talks about the other civil wars in chapters 10 and 11, he's talking about the clashes between workers and industrialists in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Exactly. He argues that alongside the Civil War that we all know, there were other civil wars happening throughout U.S. history. And these were the battles between workers who are fighting for fair wages and decent working conditions and the powerful industrialists who were often exploiting them.
Right. I mean, this is where Zinn's focus on the working class really shines through.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't just talk about like abstract economic forces. He tells the stories of real people struggling to survive.
Exactly.
You know, one story from Zinn's book that really stuck with me was about this young girl named Mary Harris Jones.
Oh, yeah.
Mother Jones, as she was called.
Mother Jones.
Yeah. And she became this fierce advocate for minors' rights.
Yeah.
After seeing these horrific conditions that they face, like using children as young as 6 in the coal mines.
It's a heartbreaking story, but it's also incredibly powerful. And, Zinn uses these personal accounts to bring history to life, to show the human cost of these struggles. He doesn't want us to just read about history. He wants us to feel it.
It's hard to imagine living in a time when worker protections were practically non-existent.
Yeah.
It makes you appreciate how far we've come in terms of labor rights.
Yeah.
But it also makes you wonder if we're kind of taking those rights for granted.
That's a question worth asking.
Yeah.
And it's just one example of how Zinn's work connects the past to the present and urges us to think critically about the world around us.
Absolutely. He doesn't just present history as a set of facts.
Right.
He invites us to question, to challenge, to think for ourselves.
And that's what makes it so powerful.
Yeah.
It's not just a history book. It's a call to action in a way.
Right.
Yeah. And, speaking of questioning and challenging, let's jump ahead to Zinn's take on the Vietnam War in Chapter 18.
Okay.
He was obviously a very vocal critic of the war, and in the book, he really digs into the complexities, exploring the motivations behind U.S. involvement.
Right.
And highlighting the devastating impact it had, both on the Vietnamese people and American soldiers.
Yeah. Zinn doesn't just focus on the battles and the politics, though.
Right.
He also gives a voice to the anti-war movement.
Yeah.
Showing how everyday people resisted what they saw as an unjust conflict.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He talks about the protests, the teach-ins, the draft resistance.
Wow.
He talks about the courage it took to speak out against the war, especially at a time when dissent wasn't always tolerated.
Right.
He even includes personal stories from soldiers who, became disillusioned with the war and spoke out against it, risking their careers and their reputations.
That must have been incredibly difficult to go against the prevailing narrative.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially when it involves something as sensitive as war.
Yeah, and Zinn's willingness to present these dissenting voices is a testament to his commitment to telling a more complete and inclusive history. He wants us to see that even in the face of overwhelming power, there were always individuals and groups who resisted, who stood up for what they believed in.
It's like that quote from the book that really stuck with me. There is no flag large enough to cover the shame of killing innocent people.
Yeah. That's a powerful one.
It's a powerful one. It reminds us of the human cost of war.
Yeah.
And the importance of questioning the narratives that are used to justify it.
Exactly.
And speaking of questioning narratives, let's move on to the 1960s and 70s.
Yeah.
A period of intense social and political upheaval that Zinn covers in chapters 19 and 20.
Right.
You've got the civil rights movement, the women's liberation movement, the anti-war protests. I mean, it was a time of incredible activism.
Absolutely.
And demands for change.
Yeah.
But if I remember correctly, Zinn argues that the government and those in power weren't just sitting back passively.
Oh, absolutely not. Zinn details how, institutions and those in positions of authority often reacted to these movements with a combination of, attempts to co-opt them and outright repression.
Yeah.
He argues that while these movements achieved significant victories, there was also a constant struggle to maintain control and preserve existing power structures.
It makes you think about how social movements are often portrayed today.
Yeah.
How certain voices are amplified while others are marginalized or silenced?
Right.
It raises questions about whose stories are being told and whose interests are being served.
Precisely. Zinn's work encourages us to be critical consumers of information, to look beyond the surface and ask who benefits from this narrative, who is being left out.
It's like he's giving us a set of tools to deconstruct the dominant narratives, to see history and the present with a more critical and nuanced lens.
Exactly.
And he's not just telling us to be critical, he's showing us how he's giving us concrete examples of how people throughout history have resisted oppression and challenged the status quo.
And that's one of the things that makes a people's history so inspiring.
Yeah.
It's not just a litany of injustices.
Right.
It's a testament to the power of ordinary people to make a difference.
Right.
Zinn reminds us that history is not predetermined. It's made by the choices we make, the actions we take, the stories we choose to tell.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the weight of history.
Yeah.
To think that one person can't possibly make a difference.
Right.
But Zinn's book shows that even small acts of resistance can have a ripple effect.
Yeah.
inspiring others and contributing to larger movements for change.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, you don't have to be a famous figure or a leader to make a difference. Every act of resistance, every voice raised against injustice contributes to a larger tapestry of change.
And that's a powerful message, especially in times when things might feel bleak or overwhelming,
Right. Zinn's book reminds us that change is possible, that people have always fought for a better world, and that their struggles can inspire us to continue that fight today.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes from the book really captures that sentiment. If history is to be creative, it should emphasize new possibilities by disclosing those hidden episodes of the past where people showed their ability to resist, to join together, and to occasionally win.
It's a beautiful reminder that history is not just about the powerful and the victorious. It's about the countless individuals who fought for justice, for equality, for a world where everyone could thrive, and their stories, even if they're not always told in textbooks, can be incredibly empowering.
So what's the biggest takeaway you hope our listener gets from this deep dive into a people's history?
I said the biggest takeaway is this. Don't accept the narratives you're given blindly. Question everything. Dig deeper. Seek out diverse perspectives, and remember that history is not just a collection of dates and facts. It's a story about people, about their struggles, their triumphs, and their enduring hope for a better future.
Zinn's book can be a challenging read.
Yeah.
But it's also incredibly rewarding.
Absolutely.
It makes you think differently about American history, about the world we live in, about your own place in it.
Right.
It can even inspire you to be a part of creating a more just and equitable future.
And A People's History of the United States is not just a book, it's a conversation starter.
Yeah.
It's meant to spark debate, to challenge assumptions, and to encourage people to think critically about the world around them. So if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend checking it out. You can find a link to the book in the episode description.
Absolutely. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into a people's history, make sure you subscribe to our channel for more insightful explorations of impactful books. We're always on the lookout for books that challenge us, inspire us, and help us understand the world in new and meaningful ways.
So until next time, keep those pages turning and those minds expanding.